Republican primary debate number 3 was tonight. We'll have full analysis and discussion on tomorrow's show, but I wanted to just sort of go over a few things. They sometimes start off with these questions and they go down the line and everybody gets a chance to answer. And tonight they started with, what's your biggest weakness? And please don't say something like, oh, I work too hard or I'm a perfectionist. And it got good immediately. John Kasich, who I actually think is the most reasonable candidate on that stage, said, my biggest weakness is we're on the verge of picking someone who can't do this job. Mike Huckabee then said he tries to live and play by the rules, and that can be, I guess, somewhat of a weakness. And then I thought, yeah, he is all about playing by the rules unless he is supporting a crazy religious nut named Kim Davis who thinks her Bible gives her the authority to ignore the rules. In those cases, Huckabee is not at all about playing by the rules. Jeb Bush says he's impatient. That's his weakness. Marco Rubio says he's too optimistic. I mean, just ludicrous. Donald Trump says he trusts people too much. Ben Carson said his weakness is until hundreds of thousands of people told him to run for president, he didn't really see himself being president. Carly Fiorina said that these are serious times. And last debate, her weakness was she didn't smile enough. Ted Cruz said his weakness is he's too much of a passionate fighter, but he will drive you home. I don't know exactly what that meant. Chris Christie said the weakness is actually all on the Democratic side, including a socialist, although he isn't sure which one is the socialist. And then Rand Paul totally avoided the question, said something about debt. So starting off completely bizarrely, let's go through some of the ideas that were suggested. And I thought some of the moderation was kind of weird and not very good and sort of kind of gotcha journalism, but at the same time, it wasn't really backed up in many cases by any kind of facts, and that makes it fall apart pretty quickly. They went after both Ben Carson and Donald Trump for their ludicrous tax plans right away. Ben Carson was asked about his tithe 10% biblical tax plan, which is, I mean, absolutely insane. And then he said, well, actually, it's a tithe tax plan based on the Bible, but it would be closer to 15%, not 10%. And of course, this is completely unsound. At 10%, it would cause about a $2 trillion deficit. Becky Quick estimated sort of on the fly that at 15% or close to 15%, you'd still be dealing with, 1.5 trillion in additional deficit that tax plan would cost. And his explanation was it'll all work out because the economy is going to do so great. And Donald Trump said the exact same thing. He was asked, you're going to do all these tax cuts, and actual economists who know something have analyzed it and they figured out that it's going to explode the deficit. And he says, no, it's not going to, because the economy is just going to grow so much. John Kasich came in and said, Donald Trump and Ben Carson have no idea what they're talking about. 10% tithe taxes, deporting 10 million people. Those two candidates are living in fantasy land, and I could not agree more. And then Carly Fiorina jumping in and saying, wait, I want to turn too. And in one of the few moments, she didn't just criticize Hillary Clinton, saying, my tax plan would be 3 pages long. I have no idea what it would be, or at least she didn't tell us, but it would fit onto 3 pages. Let's talk about some of the other dynamics in this debate. Donald Trump bashed John Kasich by saying, hey, this guy was a partner at Lehman Brothers, and when it all fell apart, he was there, and that's why he's at the end of the stage, because his poll numbers have tanked. Marco Rubio seemed by far the most rehearsed. It sounded almost like he was doing soliloquies from a dramatic Shakespeare reading. The way he was speaking, it just sounded so patently rehearsed. And I liked the question to Fiorina, which was basically, you're running on your business record, which is a completely abortive record. How do you respond? And she really had no response, just going into a sort of talking point coma, making very little sense. Ted Cruz dropped the hammer and started bashing all of the so-called gotcha questions. And then by the time he was done criticizing the moderators and coughing for 30 seconds, he just didn't answer the question he was asked about the debt. And to be quite honest, I don't know that he would have had anything very productive to say about that. I also noticed during the debate that John Harwood, Becky Quick, and Carl Quintanilla were the 3 anchors throughout the entire 3 moderators during the entire debate. And even when Carl Quintanilla would ask long series of questions where John Harwood wasn't even involved, a bunch of the candidates kept referring to John. And I don't know if they were somehow put off by Carl Quintanilla and they preferred to pretend that John Harwood was asking them questions, or maybe they just think everybody on the stage was named John. I have no idea, but that was sort of bizarre. Donald Trump was again asked about his bankruptcies. That's kind of old hat at this point. He's addressed it many times. You know what he's going to say. Those were business bankruptcies, not personal bankruptcies. They were done based on the law and what I'm allowed to do. I took advantage of it. I took advantage of the law, and I'm hugely successful, and my net worth is $10 billion. I don't know that there's much more to get out of Donald Trump by asking about the bankruptcies. Marco Rubio was asked about his personal financial mistakes, and he said, hey, I didn't inherit anything. I screwed up my own money, essentially. And then, this was a little weird, Rubio said he thinks anyone who makes $40,000, $50,000, or $60,000 is making a low wage. He may be forgetting that 51% of Americans earn under $30,000 per year. His comments about $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 seemed a little bit disconnected for me. Carly Fiorina, remaining completely obsessed with just criticizing Hillary Clinton in two different cases. In one case, Carly Fiorina jumped in after Ted Cruz was asked a question about women, and Fiorina interrupted merely to talk about how terrible Hillary Clinton is. And, you know, we go back to that moment when a Ted Cruz super PAC donated $500,000 to a Carly Fiorina super PAC, and we said there may be an interest among some of the other candidates in keeping Carly Fiorina in as long as possible, because as a woman, she's able to attack Hillary Clinton in a way that maybe they cannot. Every debate so far is proving us right on that hypothesis. Marco Rubio made an attempt to talk about Benghazi. It didn't go too far. Ben Carson had a pretty good moment on gay marriage by the standards of the Republican Party, where he said, yeah, I believe marriage is one man and one woman, but I have no problem being on the board of Costco, or whatever involvement he had with Costco, a company that has the same employer benefits and rights for same-sex couples as opposite-sex couples. And it was actually, again, within the internal logic of Republicans who want to be anti-gay but not appear to be that anti-gay, a pretty good moment for Ben Carson. Mike Huckabee, in what I thought was one of the most perverse moments of the debate, brought up that we should be focused on curing diseases. Mike Huckabee is the guy who was renting his mailing list to all sorts of quack cancer and diabetes cures, and he's the last guy who should be talking about curing disease. Donald Trump got into this weird back and forth where Becky Quick said, oh, you've said you're against H-1B visas, and you criticized Mark Zuckerberg and said that Marco Rubio is his personal senator and all this stuff. And Donald Trump just flat out denied it. And I just went on Donald Trump's website, and it was there in black and white that, yes, he is against Mark Zuckerberg and Marco Rubio's bill to triple H-1B visas, and that it is indeed Mark Zuckerberg's personal senator. That was in black and white, and maybe by the time you watch this, they'll have scrubbed that from the website. I don't know. Ben Carson had a couple interesting comments about drugs and medicine. He was asked, how should we reduce drug prices? And he said, well, we should do it by reducing regulation. I mean, insane, right? Completely disconnected from any empirical economic realities. But then this got really interesting. Ben Carson was asked about his connection to some scam medical cures and treatments that he appeared to be associated with. And he gave this completely unintelligible answer, maybe hoping to hypnotize people with his bizarre vocal delivery, saying, hey, I had no relationship with those companies. It's total propaganda. I mean, yeah, I may have done a few speeches, but it's not really anything. And, oh, yeah, I mean, I might have gotten paid for the speeches, but it's just all propaganda. And, oh, it's a really good product, and I stand by it, and personally I use it. But listen, it's all a total lie. I wasn't even remotely involved. I mean, just laughably not believable in that case. There was an interesting exchange with Donald Trump about guns, where Donald Trump said, well, he carries a gun, which is hard to do in New York City, which is absolutely true. Maybe that's true. We have no idea. He was asked, well, would you feel more comfortable if your employees carried guns into work? And he said, yes, I might feel more comfortable if my employees carried guns into work. And then it was brought up, well, you know, your resorts don't allow guns. You're a big critic of gun-free zones, but your own resorts don't allow guns. Would you change those rules? And he said, yes, he would change those rules. Why hasn't he changed them already? He doesn't have to be president to change the rules around carrying guns at his own resorts. If he's so against gun-free zones and he wants to carry guns and he's more comfortable with his employees carrying guns and he would let people at his resorts carry guns, change the rule. You could do it today. You don't have to be president to do that. Carly Fiorina throwing in addition to her completely non sequitur attacks on Hillary Clinton, throwing in a bunch of lies, one of which was that businesses are going out of business because of Obamacare, any number of serious studies on that issue. Completely untrue, just absolutely untrue. And then I really liked it when Donald Trump mentioned how super PACs are a disaster and we need to do away with them. The entire stage was quiet. Nobody else was going to get involved against super PACs because they're all relying on super PACs. We were watching to see whether Jeb Bush would reemerge. He did not. He tried to jump all over Marco Rubio, suggesting that he resign instead of continuing to miss votes. And Rubio hit him back really hard, saying, yeah, you only care about my votes because it's a way to attack me. Because when John McCain was missing the same number of votes I'm missing now when he was running for president, you didn't say a word about it. You were all about John McCain. And it did not look good for Jeb Bush at all. And then he really didn't get very much speaking time. The final clock as far as speaking time was Marco Rubio, followed by Carly Fiorina, followed by John Kasich, then Trump, then Cruz, Christie, Huckabee, Carson, Paul, and then Jeb Bush, the guy who needed the most speaking time if he was going to try to rescue his campaign, and he got the least. The debate was a total and absolute mess. The question I had, which I think is the most reasonable question for people who have any basis in fact when analyzing these candidates, is which Republican candidate did the best job as portraying themselves as the least insane, as less obviously insane? And I think the answer was John Kasich, and then Rand Paul after that. And when you watch these 10 or 11 individuals on the stage, John Kasich is by far the guy with the most nuanced and specific knowledge of political issues. And I feel bad because he has some sort of physical and facial tics. And I feel like that makes him appear differently than if he didn't have those tics. But when you listen to what the guy says and put aside sort of his physical delivery, he's the guy who's by far making the most sense up there. Knowledge of stuff and nuance and an understanding of things. But unfortunately, doesn't seem like that's really what the Republican electorate is going for right now. Totally unproductive debate. I mean, you've got 11 people on the stage. Everybody's shouting over each other. The moderators had very little control over the debate. This stood out to me of the first three as just being the most unfettered, unabashed mess. And the moderators may be partially to blame for this, but also I think that the candidates, as this goes forward, they're all realizing that time becomes shorter and shorter before the primaries actually start. It was a shit show. I mean, it was of absolutely no value in terms of the goal of electing a reasonable president in 2016. As I said, I think John Kasich did the best job in terms of communicating like a normal person. And I don't think he's really going to make much of an impact with the Republican electorate. We will have more extensive coverage and more analysis of this on the show tomorrow.